Ward number 7. The Live Bait Cycle 2. By Salvatore di Monferrat. Edited by Carl Lerchik. There is no real difference between a warm, snug study and this ward. A man's peace and contentment do not lie outside a man, but in himself. Anton Chekhov. Ward number 6. I can forgive thee the murder of thy mother, of thy wife and thy brother. But spare my ears the recital of thy verses. Henryk Sienkiewicz, Quo Vadis. 1. Adrian Weiss sat by the window of the common room. Actually, these days it was just Adrian. No one had addressed him as Dr. Weiss in almost a decade, and on the rare occasions he whispered the title to himself in the dark. It sounded like a phonetic error, a glitch in the acoustics of the place. The suite was quiet. It was designed for 3 men, with 3 small sleeping quarters branching off a central living space that smelled faintly of bleach and floor wax. It didn't look like a prison exactly. It looked like a waiting room for a flight that had been cancelled years ago. The door to the suite did not have a number, but the suite to the left had number 6 on it. There was no suite to the right. The window looked out on a parking lot that had been designed by someone who believed asphalt was a form of therapy. Beyond it, the New Jersey Turnpike hummed, a constant, low-frequency reminder that somewhere people were going places. Adrian did not go places. Adrian wrote. He sat at the small laminate desk in his alcove and picked up the pen with his left hand. It had taken him 6 months to retrain the muscles. At first, the script had been jagged, the letters looking like they were screaming. Now, they were uniform. Tight. Controlled. Sinistra, his mind whispered. The Latin word for left, but also for omen, for awkwardness, for bad luck. It fit. He could have kept writing with his right hand, of course. The thumb was there, the middle finger was there. But the index finger, the pointer, the accuser, the digit of authority, was gone. The stump was neat, healed into a shiny pucker of scar tissue. He didn't hide it. He just didn't use it. To write with the maimed hand felt like an admission that the transaction in his study had been real. To write with the left hand felt like a new administration. He adjusted the stack of loose-leaf paper he was writing on. He was rewriting Quo Vadis. No, of course he wasn't. He was going to rename his version. Sienkiewicz had gotten it all wrong. He had made Petronius's suicide too sentimental, too much of a moral victory over Nero. A true arbiter of elegance wouldn't die to make a point. He would die because the party had become aesthetically compromising. Adrian wrote. The vein opened not like a wound, but like a punctuation mark. He looked at the sentence. It was competent. It was almost good. It lacked the cold, diamond-hard brilliance he remembered possessing. But memory is a liar. Maybe he had always been this mediocre. They're moving the drop again, a voice said. Adrian didn't look up. Henderson was standing in the doorway of his own room, vibrating with the specific frequency of a man who knows too much. Henderson had been a DEA agent or a logistics manager for FedEx or a high school gym teacher. The file said one thing. Henderson said another. The Pied Piper cartel, Henderson whispered, his eyes scanning the linoleum for invisible signals. Nick Cologne is shifting the supply lines. I saw the laundry truck. It turned left at the gate. Left means fentanyl. Right means linen. Go away, Henderson, Adrian said, not unkindly. He carefully dotted an I with his left hand. They aren't using kids to distribute fentanyl from what do they call this place now? A sanatorium? Henderson stiffened. He looked at Adrian with genuine pity. You don't get it, Henderson said. They aren't using kids. They are kids. He vanished back into his room to document the license plates or trace connections between passing clouds and rates of fentanyl overdoses. In the third room, Robert Ann turned over. Robert didn't speak about cartels. Robert didn't speak much at all. He was a doctor who had lost his license and his veins to hydromorphone. He lay facing the wall, doing invisible arithmetic with his fingers, calculating doses, calculating the distance between the suite and the medication dispensary down the hall. Adrian returned to his page. He wrote another 3 paragraphs. He fixed Petronius's dialogue. He deleted an adjective. He felt a phantom sensation in his missing finger, a ghost pointing at a better word he couldn't quite reach. At 11 a.m., the door to the suite opened. It wasn't a nurse. Nurses bustled. This visitor entered with the silence of a librarian entering a vault. "Good morning, Adrian," she said. Nancy. Her badge actually read N. L. McGill, M.S.W. Years ago, she had tried to introduce herself as Ms. McGill, but the collective subconscious of the place, fed on old classic rock radio loops, had decided otherwise. Her name was McGill, and she called herself Lil, but everyone knew her as Nancy. She had stopped correcting them years ago. She was blonde, efficient, and possessed eyes of a startling, intelligent green that seemed entirely out of place in a room painted the colour of old oatmeal. She didn't check the room for contraband. She didn't ask Robert about his mood today. She looked at the stack of pages on Adrian's desk. She looked at them with a hunger that unnerved him. "You're productive today," she said. "The work demands it," Adrian said. He put down the pen. He felt the familiar flicker of arrogance, the old reflex to posture. "I'm making significant progress on the critique of the Neronian circle. It's becoming quite substantial." Nancy nodded. She reached out and touched the edge of the stack. Her finger seemed to trace the shapes of the paragraphs. "I'm glad. It's important work." She meant it. That was the strange thing. The doctors humoured him. The orderlies ignored him. Nancy treated his rewriting of a Victorian-era novel as if it were a matter of national security. Adrian cleared his throat. He looked at her badge, then at her face. He felt a sudden, magnanimous impulse. He needed to formalize this arrangement. He needed to re-establish the hierarchy. "Nancy," he said. "Ms. McGill," he corrected himself, pitching his voice to the lecture hall baritone he had almost perfected again. "I've been thinking. As the manuscript grows, the administrative burden is becoming significant. I may require someone to organize the archives, to manage the flow." He paused, offering a benevolent smile. "Are you by any chance looking for a research assistant position?" The room went quiet. Henderson was muttering in his room. Robert Ann breathed in the slow, shallow rhythm of the depressed. Nancy looked at him. For a second, something fractured in her expression, a crack in the professional veneer that showed a terrible, crushing tenderness underneath. It looked like pity, but hot. It looked like grief. Then it was gone. "I'd be honored, Dr. Weiss," she said softly. Adrian nodded, satisfied. "Good. We'll start with the indexing. I'll have a new batch for you tomorrow." "I'll be ready," she said. She turned to leave. She didn't check on the other 2 inhabitants of the suite. She didn't ask after them. She just checked Adrian's work. Adrian picked up his pen. The left hand cramped, but he forced it to move. In the time of Nero, he wrote, survival was not a matter of strength, but of style. He didn't know that tomorrow the desk would be clean. He didn't know that Nancy would carry these pages to her office, read them once with the devotion of a monk reading scripture, and then feed most of them, one by one, into the cross-cut shredder in her office. The pages that were spared, the rare ones, would go into a folder, the initials AW written on the cover in a calligraphic hand. He just knew that he had a staff again. He went back to work. 2. The next morning, the flow arrived. It didn't come often. Usually the act of writing was a negotiation between his brain and his clumsy left hand, a friction that turned thoughts into cramps. But today, the channel opened. The noise of the turnpike faded. Henderson's muttered commentary about the laundry trucks dissolved into white noise. Robert's endless counting became a percussion setting the cadence. Even the phantom itch in his missing index finger stopped, as if the ghost had finally decided to cooperate. Adrian was working on the culmination of the novel, the bath scene. In the original, Petronius had died joking, mocking Nero to the end, turning his death into a political statement. Vulgar, Adrian thought. Petronius Arbiter does not engage in politics. Politics is for people who cannot afford aesthetics. His Petronius would not die in protest, definitely not to protest Nero. He would die because he was bored. Adrian wrote for 3 hours without lifting his hand. The ink ran smooth and black. He described the steam rising from the warm water, the scent of verbena and rosemary, the way the blood ribboned out into the bath like smoke in a distinct, unhurried calligraphy. Then the sentence came. It arrived fully formed, dropping into his mind with the weight of a stone, sinking into a deep well. It was the synthesis he had been chasing for a decade. The bridge between the classical world he had lost and the absurd world he now inhabited. He wrote it down, his left hand trembling slightly, not from weakness, but from the shock of precision. Petronius sat in the warm water and realized he had finally solved the problem of Sisyphus. The only way to defeat the boulder is to let it roll over you. Adrian stared at the page. It was perfect. No, it was better than perfect. It was good. Petronius would have approved. He felt a sudden, terrifying clarity. The oatmeal walls seemed to sharpen. The smell of bleach became acute. For a second he wondered where he was. "Walk time," a voice said from the doorway. It was an orderly, a large Russian man who possessed an unpronounceable last name, Kobatov, and viewed his charges with the benevolent indifference of a zookeeper. "I need a moment," Adrian said. His voice shook. I just finished something important." "Walk time, Adrian. You know the rules. Circulation is mandatory." Adrian looked at the page. He wanted to hide it. He wanted to press it to his chest. But then the desire passed. He left the page on top of the stack. It was safe. Nancy was his research assistant. She would file it. "Coming," Adrian said. He stood up, put on his slippers, and walked out of the suite, leaving the best sentence he had written in a very long time exposed to the air. 3. Nancy entered Adrian's room 11 minutes after he left for his walk. The walks were scheduled for an hour, though they sometimes ran shorter if it rained or if patients became agitated. Sometimes it took longer if the weather was nice, or if the orderlies wanted to chat about the previous night's game. She had learned the rhythm years ago. 20 minutes after departure, the floor staff moved through the suites, changing bedding, refilling water carafes, checking for contraband. It was the window when she could work unobserved, just another person doing rounds. She moved to his desk with the careful efficiency of someone performing a sacrament that has become routine, or maybe routine that has become a sacrament. The stack of loose-leaf pages sat where he'd left them, the top sheet still bearing the faint depression where his left hand had rested. She picked them up carefully, almost reverently. She read standing. She always read standing. The first 2 pages were what she expected, overwritten. Too many adjectives, the same mistake he always made now. The dialogue stiff, competent at best. Then the 3rd page. Petronius sat in the warm water and realized he had finally solved the problem of Sisyphus. The only way to defeat the boulder is to let it roll over you. She stopped, read it again. It was good, actually good, the kind of sentence he used to write. She stood there holding the pages. If Petronius was solved, there would be nothing left to fix. And then what would Adrian do? She folded the pages and carried them down the hall to her office. The shredder sat by the window next to the printer, which in turn sat next to a plant that had been refusing to die of neglect for over a decade. Crosscut, not the old strip kind. It turned paper into confetti, could handle CDs, credit cards, complete document destruction. She read the pages through once more. Then she drew out the third one, the one with the sentence, and set it aside and fed the rest in slowly, one by one. The machine hummed. The first 2 pages disappeared into tiny, even pieces, and so did the dialogue and the overwritten bath scene and 3 hours' worth of pages written by a left hand learning to obey. The shredder may not have disproved the old adage that manuscripts don't burn, but it certainly proved that they shredded just fine. The third page she slid into the folder with the initials AW on the cover, the one that had been filling, a page or 2 a month, for over a decade. Then she put the folder back in its drawer and picked up the book that had been lying on top of it, The Myth of Sisyphus, and opened it to a marked page. One must imagine Sisyphus happy. She stared at the page for a long moment, then closed the book and went back to her rounds. 4. Adrian prayed in the mornings before the writing. He had not prayed for the first 55 years of his life. He had held the entire question to be a genre confusion. Theology was literature, nothing more and nothing less. He had said so elegantly in auditoriums, and the audiences had laughed their warm, ticketed laughs. Now he knelt on the linoleum between the bed and the desk, because kneeling seemed grammatically correct, and he addressed himself to a God in whose existence he had developed complete confidence. The confidence was the problem. Faith, as he had once taught it, was a wager made under uncertainty. He prayed briefly and without style. He had tried style in the early years, the Psalms being, after all, adjacent to his field, and had given it up. Ornament implied an audience that could be swayed by rhetoric, and he had no evidence of this being the case. Now he simply reported. He named the day. He asked for nothing. He listened. There was the turnpike, there was the heating system, clearing its throat. There was Henderson in the next room, narrating license plates. Amen. He got up, his knees informed on him, and he went to the desk. He had done this every morning for almost 10 years. The silence on the line did not discourage him. It was, he sometimes thought, the only conversation in the building in which both parties could be assumed to be paying attention. Henderson appeared in the doorway after breakfast, holding the spiral notebook the staff let him keep, because confiscating it had proved worse. "You taught history, right? Devils, crusades, that stuff?" Adrian set down his pen. "Comparative literature. Mostly devils. Why?" "The Pied Piper cartel, the 2 at the top, Nick Cologne and Steve Cloyes. Those names mean anything to you?" Adrian stared at him. "Nicholas of Cologne," he said. "Stephen of Cloyes. The Children's Crusade, 1212. Henderson's face lit up like a man whose mortgage had been forgiven. "Exactly. You see it. 2 boys who led thousands of children on a doomed march to Jerusalem. Most of them died or were sold into slavery. It's medieval history, Henderson. They chose those names. It's a message. You gave them those names. You read about the crusade on some night shift and your mind supplied the rest." Henderson went quiet. The notebook hung at his side. "You think I'm insane," he said. "Yes. But you believe I was DEA." Adrian considered it. The vocabulary, The procedure in the man's spine, visible even now, even here, in slippers. Chain of custody, controlled deliveries, the 8-year-olds at the checkpoint whom Henderson never mentioned and yet never stopped mentioning. A man could not break this precisely without real training. "Yes," Adrian said. "Then maybe I'm not as crazy as you think." He went back to his room and his window and his traffic. Adrian looked at his own pages. In the time of Nero. Henderson had taken everything he knew, and it was a great deal, and built from it a structure that made the horror coherent and himself necessary. The question of what, exactly, Adrian was doing with Petronius presented itself at the edge of the desk, and Adrian, with the discipline of long practice, declined to read it. He picked up the pen. On Thursdays, for 20 minutes, there was Dr. Eugene Trunk, D.O. He reviewed the suite, treating the chart as the patient and the patient as a source of error in the chart. He was a heavy, courteous man with soulful eyes who seemed to put enormous effort into saying as little as possible. On Thursdays he wore his title the way other men wore a good coat, kept for occasions, with the slight over-carefulness of someone to whom it no longer quite belonged. "How is the writing progressing, Adrian?" "Well, I think the middle section is finally taking shape." "Good. Productive activity." He initialed something. "Sleep." "Adequate." "Appetite." "Adequate." He initialed something else. Continued observation was warranted. It was always warranted. The warranting of it was, as far as Adrian could determine, Trunk's entire profession, and he practiced it the way Kobatov enforced the walks. Benevolently, indifferently, in bulk. That Thursday, after Trunk had initialed his way out of the suite, Henderson appeared in the doorway with the notebook. Robert was in the armchair, working through the afternoon's arithmetic, fingers rising and falling like a man playing a very slow instrument. "Your doctor," Henderson said. "Trunk." "He's your doctor too." "I worked Brighton Beach for a while. Joint Task Force, Surveillance End. You sit in a van 11 hours a day with the window cracked. You pick up some of the language. Not grammar, menus, insults, names." He opened the notebook without looking at it. There was a Georgian who moved product through a banya on Neptune Avenue. Mid-level, but respected. Everybody called him Cobot. "Cobot," Adrian said. "Trunk. An elephant's trunk." The translation was out of him before he had decided anything about it. Pedantry, in Adrian, had always outrun caution by a stride. On account of the size of his... Henderson paused, consulting some inner statute of decency. Well, not his nose. Adrian put down the pen. "Kobatov," Henderson said. "Your orderly. And Dr. Trunk, D.O., Thursdays 2 to 2:20. Same name, Professor. One in each language. And I didn't translate it. You did." "People translate their names, Henderson. My grandfather arrived at the pier as Weissman and left half of it in the harbour. Half of this country is a translation. It's assimilation, not a grand conspiracy." "Maybe," Henderson said. He turned the notebook around and held it up, too far away to read, which for Henderson was the point. Evidence was to be acknowledged, not handled. Trunk, Thursdays 2 to 2:20. 11 months of Thursdays. Kobatov, walks, mornings, weather permitting. 11 months of mornings. Name one time you have seen the two of them in the same room. Adrian opened his mouth to say constantly, obviously, and went looking through his memory file, and the file was empty. He audited 11 months of initialed Thursdays and mandatory mornings, and could not produce a single co-occurrence. It proved nothing. Absences proved nothing. "So what? It's a duty schedule," he said. "Or what? One man, two roles? He was a doctor where he came from. He's an orderly here, and on Thursdays he gets to be the first thing again, in front of an audience that can't contradict him. That's about as real as your children's cartel." It came out with more sympathy than he had meant to spend, and he heard that too. "A schedule explains everything," Henderson said agreeably. "That's what makes it a good cover." But there was another thing, which Henderson and his surveillance van Russian could not have known, and which Adrian had carried into the building the way other men carry shrapnel. Kobatov was a name out of the literature, the young colleague at the end of Chekhov's Ward No. 6, the one who inherits Ragin's practice and escorts him, solicitously, to the ward. Adrian had taught the story in the intro to Russian literature when he was a grad student. He had set an exam question on it, and if the staff of a building were named out of literature, then the building was, in some sense, a text, and a text implied an author. Adrian had once received an author's representatives at home, in his study, and the visit had cost him a finger, and the rest of it. The thought presented itself at the edge of Adrian's mind, in the usual place for thoughts that people invent drugs to control. Adrian, with the discipline of long practice and help of modern pharmacology, declined to acknowledge it. "You think I'm reaching," Henderson said. He did not seem wounded. He was logging it. "I think you're precise," Adrian said. "Precision and truth are different instruments." Henderson wrote something, dated it, initialed it. "The record will show you confirmed the translation," he said, and went back to his room, and his window, and his traffic. In the armchair, the arithmetic had stopped. Adrian noticed it the way one noticed the turnpike, by its absence. Robert sat with his fingers suspended above an invisible column, and then the fingers began again, slower now, like a man taking down a long addition he had trusted for years, carrying everything, starting from the top. Adrian picked up the pen. The grandfather defense was sound. Names shed their countries every day at every pier in the world, and landed where they landed, and meant nothing, and rhymed anyway. In the time of Nero, he wrote, and did not look at the doorway. 5. Robert Ann spoke perhaps 40 words in an ordinary week, and gave no warning when he was about to spend them. It was a grey afternoon. The television was on with the sound off, a nature documentary. Wolves moving through snow with unhurried competence. Adrian was writing at the common room table for the change of light. Robert sat in the armchair doing his arithmetic on his fingers, the doses and distances of an internal pharmacy that never closed. "You're Roman," Robert said, "the one in the bath." Adrian looked up. Petronius. "My father asked me to help him die," Robert said. "He said, 'You are a doctor, you can do this.' He asked me in Vietnamese so my mother wouldn't understand. I said no. The wolves crossed a river. I think about it every day," Robert said. He was looking at the television. "What does your Petronius decide?" "I haven't gotten there yet," Adrian lied. Robert nodded slowly with what looked like professional courtesy, one specialist acknowledging another's difficult case. He had also never gotten to the end. He turned back to the wolves. A week later, Trunk adjusted Robert's dose, and for 2 days, Robert murmured in Vietnamese at the muted television, a low liturgical murmur with numbers in it. On the third evening, the murmur stopped, and his voice arrived clear, fully formed, as if it had only been waiting in line. "You pray, I've heard you, through the wall." Adrian's pen stopped. "Yes." "Does he answer?" "No." "Good," Robert said. There was relief in it, an actual clinical relief, a differential ruled out. Then, if he did, what would you ask for? Adrian began assembling a sentence about Petronius, about the work, and understood midway that no answer was expected, and let it lapse. "I'd ask to go back," Robert said, since the question had been his all along. "Tell my father yes, but we don't get to go back. There isn't a door of that kind anywhere in the building." He folded back into himself. the murmur resuming like weather, and Adrian sat for a while, holding the pen, not writing. 6. The visitors' lot held 11 cars. Margaret parked at the far end where the asphalt gave out into weeds and sat for a moment with her hands on the wheel, 10 and 2, the way she did at this particular destination and no other. The lobby knew her. The desk nurse pushed the log toward her without being asked, and she signed it, Brant, M, in the column beneath a stranger's looping blue. He was by the window in the common room. It took him the usual moment, the moment she had stopped taking personally somewhere around the 3rd year. Margaret. Hello, Adrian. She sat in the visitor's chair, which had been moulded to discourage long visits, and did its work well. They observed the silence with which these conversations opened, an institutional silence, like a grace said before a meal neither of them wanted. You look well, he said. You too. He didn't. He looked like a photograph of himself left in a window. The work is going well, he said. Petronius. The middle section is finally taking shape. It's becoming quite substantial. That's good, Adrian. She did not ask to see it. She had asked once, years ago, and he had explained kindly and at length that the manuscript was not ready for readers, and something in the kindly length of it had been worse than the rest of the visit combined. Are you still teaching? He asked. He asked it every time. She had stopped trying to decide whether he forgot the answer, or whether asking was, like the kneeling she'd heard about from the staff, simply grammatically correct. No, she said. Life interfered. He nodded gravely, a man accepting a colleague's misfortune. Leonard and I aren't together anymore, she said, because the visit had to contain something true. I'm sorry, he said, and seemed for one moment to mean it from somewhere specific. It's been a year. We're fine. My son is 8. She started to say something about him, considered the available facts and chose the smallest one. I hope he'll love reading. Of course he will, said Adrian, to whom children were a rumour. Read your favourites to him. That is what my mother did. Not that it matters. He's your son. That was, she thought, the nicest thing anyone had said to her in some months, and it had come from this room, which was a fact about her life she declined to examine in present company. 20 minutes. The chair did its work. I should go. Thank you for coming. Standard phrases, meaningless and necessary, exchanged at the border like currency. She was most of the way to the exit when she smelled it. The smell was out of place. Old books. Unmistakable and impossible here, paper going slowly brown, dust, binding glue, the faint vanilla of a library's back room. The smell of a scholar's office, the smell of a life she had handed back, like a leased car with reasonable mileage and no visible damage. It did not belong here, in this place. She stopped. The corridor was empty. Somewhere a cart rattled. The smell came from a door standing ajar, a plain staff door with a plain plate. N. L. McGill, M.S.W. The door she passed by dozens of times before, the door that was always closed. Not this time. She should not. It was no one's business, least of all hers. She had a drive ahead of her, a babysitter on the clock. She pushed the door wider with one knuckle and stepped inside. The desk first. 2 books squared with the blotter. The Myth of Sisyphus, paperback, swollen with reading, and beneath it, larger in its dust jacket, getting a bargain from the devil. Faust, from Marlowe to Goethe and beyond. She had collated the index of this book. She had spent 2 years of her 20s in its footnotes, ferrying boxes out of German archives, and somewhere in the acknowledgements, in small type, in the thanks also to, was her name, spelled correctly, which she had assured herself at the time was itself a kind of generosity. She opened it to the title page. The inscription was in his hand, the old hand, the right hand. faded as if it had been carried through weather. To Galana. She angled it to the light to be sure. To Galana. The name touched something and slid off. A student? Someone from the lectures? It sounded like a name out of an opera nobody stages anymore. She could not place it, and the not placing felt obscurely like a professional failure, as if she had been asked, after all these years, for one more piece of archival legwork, and had come back empty. At the bottom of the page, pressed in purple ink, a stamp. Abe's second-hand books and live bait. Signed, then sold, then fished back out of the world by somebody. She set it down exactly where it had been, which took her a moment because her hands wanted to keep it. Then she looked up and saw the shelf. All of him. Red devils, supernatural and trickster figures in Soviet literature. Paradise Lost and the rhetoric of temptation. The Faust book again, the trade edition, beside the first, and his collected essays she had not known were collected. His name repeated down the spines in 5 typefaces, like a man insisting on himself in different moods. Someone had hunted these down. Someone had paid shipping from used bookstores with live bait counters. Someone in this building, with a social worker's badge and a shredder by the window, owned the complete works of Adrian Weiss, and she stood in front of them feeling something she refused, on the drive home and for some years afterward, to name because every available name for it was ridiculous, and one of them was jealousy. The shelf below held different books. Chekhov in translation, Ward No. 6. And beside it a slim hardcover whose spine she could not read, the alphabet itself turning her away politely at the door. Cyrillic, except for one word her eyes assembled out of Goethe, out of the footnotes, out of the boxes from the German archives. Walpurgis. A cart rattled, nearer. She stepped out and walked the corridor at the speed of a woman who knows where the exit is. Signed nothing, said nothing, pushed the glass door into the ordinary daylight of the parking lot. She did not look back. She was, she would have said, done looking back, and she drove on that basis. 7. Adrian came back from his walk to a clean desk. He stood over it a moment. There had been a sentence. Yesterday, or was it today before the walk? A sentence with a stone in it, and water. The shape of it was still in his hand, the way the finger was still in his hand. Present, reliable, gone. He waited politely to see if it would come back. It did not. It joined the rest. He sat down. He squared a fresh sheet against the edge of the desk. He took up the pen with his left hand, sinistra, and the letters came obediently, because the letters, at least, had been retrained. In the time of Nero, Petronius the Arbiter understood that survival was not a matter of strength, but of style. Outside, the turnpike went on saying what it always said, that somewhere people were going places. Inside, Adrian went on. On the other side of the turnpike, in a neat suburb going blue with evening, a car pulled into a driveway. Margareta let herself in. The babysitter was on the couch, phone held above her face at the angle of devotion. "Oh, hi, Mrs. Brandt." Her thumb did not stop. Her son was on the other couch, folded around the tablet. Tinny music. Voices cut off mid-word. A bright noise replaced every several seconds by a brighter one. The screen lit his face from below, like footlights. He did not look up. Neither of them looked up. Margaret stood in the doorway with her keys in her hand and her coat over her arm, in the smell of her own house, which was carpet and dinner and nothing at all like old books, and watched the light change on her son's face. Then she closed the door behind her and went in. Epilogue. The hallway at 3 in the morning belonged to the vending machines and to Robert, 18. He had done the math. 18 minus 1, himself, was 17. 17 minus 7, the ward, was 10. 10 was completion. Every system agreed on that. 4 had been unlucky, obviously. He should never have attempted 4. 7 ought to have worked, and its failure had troubled him until he understood. There was no 7 on the door. The suite next door said 6, and everyone simply inferred. You cannot complete an inference. 13 had seemed promising for reasons that no longer survived. But 18 was different. 18 had structure. The dispensary machine sat in its alcove, humming. The tactics had come from his father, or from a book, or from a film with his father in the room. The provenance had worn smooth. He worked without hurry. The machine opened, or agreed to seem open. He gathered what was needed into the pocket of his robe. Everyone in the building was suffering. He had checked, ward by ward, name by name. He had done the arithmetic on all of them. He would not fail them the way he failed his father. He would end the suffering. Theirs first, then his own. This 18th attempt will succeed. "Hold it right there," Henderson said. He stepped out of the doorway shadow in his pajamas with his notebook, federal to the soles of his slippers. "That's evidence," Henderson said. "That's cartel product. Chain of custody starts now." He held out his hand. Robert looked at the hand. One did not argue with the government. His father had taught him that too, and that provenance was solid. He handed it over. Henderson inventoried the items in his notebook by the red light of the exit sign, dating the entry, initialing it. Then he disposed of the evidence in the staff bathroom, flushing twice, the way you had to with product this hot, because the cartel had people everywhere, even here, especially here. Robert walked back toward the suite, already working. There had been an error, and the error had never been his. Henderson had documented it. Kobatov and Trunk were one body answering to two names, which meant the count had been wrong the whole time. For as long as he had been numbering the souls in the building, he had numbered one too many, because one of the staff was not, by the only arithmetic that mattered, entirely a person. The census had been inflated by one. Every system he had ever built had rested on a body that wasn't there. No wonder. No wonder. 19. 19 minus 1 was 18. 18 minus 7 was 11. 11 was two ones standing side by side, himself and his father, which proved something. And this time the count was true, which meant the mercy could finally be made to balance. The numbers were already cooperating. In the morning there would be walks. Circulation was mandatory.